You guys ever see those ads that pop up on like Facebook or something? The kind that are trying to get you to download some crappy mobile game and then you actually download it and the game is nothing like what they showed you in the ad? Or, better yet, you ever see any of those TikTok videos that are like clips of Family Guy or Young Sheldon and they have some person playing shovelware at the bottom of the screen because all of us have dopamine addictions, but they're intentionally playing the game in a way that's obviously wrong, so you feel compelled to download it for yourself? Most of these games are pretty transparently stupid, but I'm sure all of us could admit that we've occasionally wanted to try one before quickly being put off by a torrent of borderline malware in the form of tracking software and scammy ads. What if it didn't have to be that way though? What if there was a title that sought to compile a short list of those games and make them playable on Steam, commercial free, and complete with achievement support? If you were going to do that though, you'd have to give it some ridiculous name that makes me immediately interested in checking it out, and you'd probably even want to throw in a recently released sequel, so like, the timing on the video makes sense. It's too bad nothing like that exists, but anyway, today I'm going to be giving you my official take on, yeah, you want those games, right? So here you go, now let's see you clear them. Alright, so the setup for this title is pretty simple. There's a lot of extraneous crap, some of which we'll cover later, but the main focus is obviously the minigames. On offer here are 5 different selections: Pinpull, Number Tower, Parking Lot, Cash Run, and Color Lab, each of which has a varying number of stages you'll need to complete and, in my humble opinion, earn 3 stars in before you can really consider them cleared. True to the best pick up and play mobile games, you can pretty much hop into any given challenge with as little as a couple of button clicks, so I won't waste much time before we get into the meat of things. This title obviously isn't a super great fit for my typical format, so I think what I'm going to do here is just go down the list and talk about each minigame individually, explain what it is, I'll give my thoughts on how it's executed, and then at the end we can wrap up with some of the extraneous crap I promised a few sentences ago. Sound good? Alright. So we're starting off with Pinpull, and this is a concept you'll probably recognize. I feel like this is definitely one of the most prototypical examples one could find of a scammy, deceptive mobile game ad going way back, so it's little surprise it was included here. The concept is pretty easy to understand, I think. You have a character in a predefined room, and your objective is to remove these golden pins in a certain order to either eliminate all of the threats on screen, or to allow your little guy to safely navigate to a pile of treasure. To make this more difficult, you'll have an assortment of various items and enemies you'll need to contend with by smartly playing off their mechanics. Lava is deadly, for example, but when mixed with water, it becomes stone. Both goblins and orcs attack the player, but orcs also attack goblins. Stuff like that. Obviously, something like this is never going to be super deep or complex, but it's a decent setup for what it is. The sound effects are functional, and the art style and animations display the correct amount of brain rot. Definitely what a prospective player would want based on the ads. The downfall here lies in the execution. This is actually the perfect minigame to talk about first in my opinion, because it's kind of emblematic of almost every issue I have with the overarching collection, displaying almost all of the problems to a limited degree. The main one, from a design perspective, might be a little hard to quantify and even harder to show on screen or to get across through footage, but I'm going to try my best because it will come up again. Basically, this minigame just feels too physicsy. Like, it uses a physics engine that's way more sophisticated than is necessary or frankly called for this kind of experience. It makes the whole thing feel a little janky. Objects can fall on each other or get stuck mid-air. Probably the best example would be that it's possible to mix lava and water in the correct manner and at the correct time, but because they just so happen to hit each other with slightly off velocity or momentum, you end up with a tiny piece of deadly lava blocking your path. It's not a huge deal. I imagine they used some existing engine for this and that made production a lot simpler, but ideally it would only be possible to lose via a mistake, not some quirk of the physics. The much more pressing concern here is just that this minigame is laughably lacking in difficulty. Like, we're talking toddler levels of easy here. Like, your 95-year-old great-grandmother who doesn't own a phone could complete most of these levels on her first try. Your only additional goal is of course to get all 3 stars in each stage, but this is just based on speed. You have to complete each level within a certain time limit, and that's totally fine, but it's also a complete non-issue because most of these puzzles will probably take less than 2 seconds of study before the solution becomes obvious. Half the time, you can just click things and win. There are 100 of these stages in total, and I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I say the first 95 are basically complete freebies. 3 stars on your first attempt. It's not until like 96 that your first neuron will activate, and honestly, it's only the last 2 or so that even come close to offering any sort of a challenge. So this one's fine, it just raised the question, why design so much filler? I would have much rather had 50 or 25 or even 10 stages total if that meant they possessed even a modicum of difficulty. Moving on then, we have Number Tower, and this one is slightly more interesting. I don't know that I've ever seen this exact game anywhere before, but it certainly appeals to a playstyle that's super common for this kind of thing. Your goal is just to defeat all the enemies, but in order to do so, you have to have a higher number than them. Defeating an enemy adds their number to your total, and there are an assortment of items that do things like divide or multiply. Removing the combat pretext, what we're basically looking at here is a math challenge. You have to do every operation on screen, but you can only add when the starting number is bigger than what you're adding to it. Your goal is just to end with a positive number. Difficulty-wise, we come out a fair bit better. There are only 50 stages this time, and sure, only like half of them have any quantity of challenge, but that's still a big improvement. Honestly, the only problem I really have with this minigame comes down to some level design minutia. The skill here, ideally, is just knowing in which order to perform operations. Always multiply before you divide, but divide after having done as little addition as possible, stuff like that. I feel like the developers didn't really understand this though, so there are a lot of columns, especially towards the end, where the numbers are quite large, but the difference between them is quite small, i.e., the correct choice is only correct by an incredibly small margin. You basically have to do the math to know which one to choose, but since you're on a pretty strict time limit, especially for 3 stars, in practice this kind of just equates to trial and error. This just doesn't seem right to me. I feel like the difficulty here should come from the sheer number of operations, and the skill tested should be the ability to string them all together in order based mostly on knowledge of some simple mathematical principles, rather than what we see here, where you're basically just trying to discern the difference between 2 incredibly similar equations. It can get a little frustrating, especially in a few of the later stages because they're so long, but it's not the end of the world. I just think it's worth pointing out because this won't be the only time the devs introduce a mechanic to an otherwise solid game that I feel shows a basic misunderstanding of what makes the game appealing in the first place. Nothing exemplifies this more than arguably my favorite minigame in this collection, Parking Lot, which tasks you with emptying out a parking lot that's been packed to the gills with cars. Each car can only move either horizontally or vertically, and they're packed in there tightly, so once again it becomes a matter of doing things in the correct order. I would compare this minigame to trying to untangle a tightly wound knot. It's very difficult to get started, but as you slowly peel away layer after layer, you gain more and more attack surfaces until, near the end, you're able to quickly wrap up the job. Personally, there was something about this process that I just found immensely satisfying. The way the speed of your progress increases exponentially honestly just scratches something in my brain. I can't get enough of it. Realistically, the last 2 levels of this mode are probably my favorite in the whole title. They feel like they have a lot of substance to them, which I really appreciate. Without fault, Parking Lot is not, however. For starters, there are only 25 levels for some reason, despite arguably being the most worthy mode to receive more stages. And once again, only the last handful offer any real challenge. This is also another one that feels weirdly physicsy. The swipes, for example, that you have to do with your mouse aren't super responsive, but that's fine, I guess. The real issue I take here is the pedestrian mechanic they introduced like halfway through. These guys patrol the periphery of the play area, and you have to avoid hitting them with any stray vehicles lest you face an immediate game over. This of course raises the question though, why? These guys are just a really odd addition in my opinion. They contribute absolutely nothing to the core gameplay conceit of not untangling, but rather serve as a completely separate distraction that actually detracts from the enjoyable part of the challenge. I mean, instant fail? There's already a fail condition. It's the timer. And in stages as long as some of these, having to start over because you hit one of the pedestrians? It's just not compelling. They aren't even implemented very well. Like, the game board is viewed from an askew perspective that makes it kind of difficult to judge distance, and that combined with the relatively unresponsive swipe function makes it feel like a huge gamble every time you have to pass one of these low lives. It's still my favorite minigame, don't get me wrong, but it just marks another baffling design choice that really makes me feel the need for like a sit down with the devs. The criticisms don't stop here either, because now it's time to do a complete 180 and talk about my least favorite minigame, Cash Run. This is by far the most different from its compatriots in that it's basically a platformer. You play as a little dude who moves in a straight line, and your goal is to navigate him safely to the end of the level. In order to do this, you have to collect money off the ground and use it to create pathways that basically work like those items you get at the end of Roblox obbies. Using your life savings as scaffolding, you're expected to avoid instant kill obstacles and pass through these gates that will perform some sort of modification on your checking account. These gates are both the entire reason this game mode exists, as well as the reason it kind of sucks. Their objective is just to present you with 2 choices, one of which is obviously correct. Think one that says -200 and another that says +1000. Then when they're making their scammy funny ad or whatever, they have the person pretending to play the game choose the obviously incorrect option, in the hopes that this will cause enough discomfort in the viewer that they download the game in an attempt to rectify this mistake and relieve some of the tension. The problem here is, while this may be an effective strategy to get people to download malware, it's just not a very compelling basis for actual gameplay. To be straight up, I just did not care for this mode. The controls are sluggish and unresponsive, some of the obstacles need to be avoided by too narrow a margin, and the entire minigame is way too dependent on luck. This is the only mode in the entire collection that doesn't use a time system to determine your stars, but rather the amount of money you have left over at the end of the level. This means that to get 3 stars, it's not at all uncommon for you to have to take a 50-50 halfway through a stage that will determine if it's even possible for you to finish or if you need to reset. It was all just uncompellingly difficult and mildly frustrating. Like, none of it was particularly heinous or anything, but despite this minigame only having 25 stages total, I was more than relieved when I finally had them cleared. This was doubly exciting because it meant that I got to move on to the 5th and final minigame, the one that I had been looking forward to the most, Color Lab. Fun fact, this is the only minigame in this entire collection I had ever felt any compulsion to play myself. In fact, I had even gone so far as to download a version of it on my phone a couple of years prior, so needless to say, if this was a decent incarnation, it was going to be a huge win. The goal of the mode is extremely simple. You just pour these test tubes into each other in an attempt to make them all homogeneous. You can only pour onto a matching color, so it is technically possible to run out of viable moves, but besides that, there are no other mechanics. Sorting these different shades appeals to the same not untangling desires as Parking Lot, so it's no surprise that clearing a complex manifestation of one of these levels would be immensely satisfying. The problem is, there are none, or maybe 2 max. As with every other minigame in this collection, there's a real issue with the stages being too easy, but this one takes it to an absolutely absurd degree. There are 50 levels here total, and I kid you not when I say, the last 5 levels of this mode would be much more appropriately situated as the first 5 levels in any reasonable difficulty progression. Everything before that, so easy as to have no reason to even exist. It's such a shame too, because again, I feel like I would have really enjoyed this mode, but there's just so little in the way of challenge that it was over just a few minutes after I finally got a chance to meaningfully engage with it. With that final level completed though, it's basically wraps. Or at least, so I thought. Yeah, remember how I mentioned this game has a lot of extraneous crap in it? Well, let's talk about some of that for a minute. So, for some reason this game has a currency system. You earn coins for doing basically everything, but particularly for clearing stages. These coins can be spent on exactly one thing: a gachapon machine. I'm gonna level with you, I don't know what this thing is for. It dispenses nameplates that you can use to change the appearance of your gamer tag, okay? There is a lot of infrastructure put into supporting what is ostensibly the world's shallowest customization mechanic. There's like a whole economy that exists exclusively to feed this useless nameplate generator. There are challenges you can complete just to earn coins so you can change the backdrop that appears behind your username in the upper right of the home menu. I guess there are technically online leaderboards too. I assume they're full of hackers, no idea, but seeing as how most of the challenges are just play the same easy levels again, sometimes in a row, there's little in the way of compelling reason to engage with them. In terms of achievements, there are 11 in total, 5 of which are for clearing every stage, and the other 5 of which are for clearing every stage with 5 stars. Going in, I thought that's all there was. I was vaguely aware that there was an additional coin collecting related achievement, but for some reason I assumed it was for 100,000, which is about the amount you'll get for 3-starring everything. If I had have looked more closely at the name of the achievement though, it would have taken less than a second for me to figure out that, in all actuality, I was going to need 10 times that much. Realistically, had I have known this from the start, I probably wouldn't have even played this game. That is an insane amount of coins, and the worst part is there isn't even an intuitive way to get them in anything even resembling that quantity. The challenges are too complex, not to mention too few, and while you can technically replay stages, you'd have to do the equivalent of replaying the entire game 9 times to get your bands up that high. It seemed impossible. The solution ended up being daily challenges. Yeah, true to its mobile game inspired roots, every night at midnight you get 4 new short quests, all of which grant a pretty decent payout. It only takes like 2 minutes to do these, so initially I was seriously considering taking this on as a daily commitment for a couple of months just to get the Steam ribbon. After a little bit of experimentation though, I actually realized, I think by accident, that the timing of these challenges is tied to your system clock. They aren't checked against a server or anything, so all you have to do is set your PC forward or even backwards 24 hours and you can do them all all over again. I can see how some people might consider system clock manipulation kind of a gray area in terms of cheating, but I think generally speaking the consensus is that it's fair game. I mean, not to cast a broad net or anything, but it's existed for basically all of history. At this point, if I can ruin your mechanic by changing the time on my computer, that's really on you more than anything. This did mean though that this achievement was now feasibly grindable. I won't get too bogged down in specifics, but I ended up devising a setup by which I could earn about 8,500 coins every 3 minutes or so, which left me to plug away for roughly 7 hours before VIP Millionaire finally popped, and I ended up missing it. I did a lot of the grinding on my laptop while I was watching TV. Never let it be said I am not committed to what I do. So anyway, that leaves us in kind of a weird place, doesn't it? What did I think about this game? Well, like I said earlier, I absolutely love the idea. I'm honestly going to be super into any kind of compilation that aims to take a handful of more obscure or hard to access games and combine them together into a more worthwhile package. The problem is, this feels more like a proof of concept, but like, for a concept that doesn't need proven. Yes, the game selection is a little bit questionable, but I could look past that. The execution is base level competent. But it just seems obvious that in a lot, if not all of the cases, the developers had a very poor understanding of what would make a specific minigame work well. Combine that with the fact that even in the best cases, any sense of difficulty is basically non-existent, and it's kind of hard for me to offer this title any glowing praise. I would be content to be neutral on it, but then I'd have to think about the VIP Millionaire achievement, and honestly, it makes 100% completion a total slog. So I would say you're probably safe avoiding this one if you're a completionist like me, unless you actively enjoy spending hours doing pointless things for no reason. If you're more of a casual and you think it looks fun, sure, go for it, but just don't expect any high-level intellectual stimulation from your purchase. This one was a bit of a disappointment to be sure, but at the end of the day, I'll still probably take a look at the sequel. And I certainly don't mind having it on my list of 100% completed games. Somehow even this script found a way to balloon to 10 pages. I need like a manager or something to help me with scope creep. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know this is a slightly different title to what I normally discuss, but I think I had a decent amount to talk about. If you did enjoy it, I would of course appreciate it if you could drop a like, get subscribed, ring the bell so you never miss a future upload, and even leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. How about, what would be your dream lineup for a title like this? Top 5 scammy mobile games. I would love to hear from you. Finally, if you have any interest at all, you can find all my social media linked in the description. I post on TikTok now, so feel free to check that out, along with any of the music that I used in this video. Alright, I think that's all I have for today, so I hope to see you next time, and as always, thanks for watching.